Greetings and welcome to the channel. Today I thought we would talk about the number one question, at least on one website, that people would ask God. And the question is somewhat negative in connotation in that it's critical of believing that God exists and that God is a benevolent God, because that question is, why is there so much evil and suffering in the world? And that's a very valid question. It's apparent to me that the vast majority of us realize that life is a wonderful thing, that it's way better than the opposite, which is dead. And as Solomon pointed out, a living dog is better than a dead lion. The gift of life is a very precious thing, that the wonder, the beauty, the richness of the experience of life is generally worth all the trouble. Now, it is true that if things get bad enough, whether it's physical pain or emotional pain, people get to the point where they would like to have it end. They would rather be dead. The scriptures discuss that. Job said in Job 14 that man that is born of a woman is of few days and full of trouble. That he comes forth like a flower and flees like a shadow. That at the end of life, looking back, it seems very, very brief, very short. And when times are very hard, it seems to be more of a struggle than it's worth at times. And it's reasonable that people observe that, and that they have empathy for others that are suffering, whether those are children or people that they know, people they don't know. There's definitely suffering and evil in life. And if God is a loving God, as the scriptures teach, how could he allow that? And part of the problem I perceive in that question is a preoccupation with this life. And the scriptures teach that this life, mortal life, is not the goal. It's not the end game. It's not our hope. Our hope, according to the scriptures, is eternal life, is a perfected life, is a future life. And this life is a test. It's a trial. It's tribulation. The scriptures refer to this life is like a race, and that it's something to be overcome. The scriptures compare this life and the world. And Jesus said that he overcame the world. In John 16:33, Jesus said, "These things I have spoken unto you, that in me ye might have peace. In the world ye shall have tribulation, but be of good cheer. I have overcome the world." And this concept of being an overcomer is consistent in the scriptures. And God himself, in the book of Revelation stated to John in Revelation 21, verses 7 and 8, "He that overcometh shall inherit all things, and I will be his God, and he shall be my son. But the fearful and unbelieving, and the abominable, and murderers, and whoremongers, and sorcerers, and idolaters, and all liars, shall have their part in the lake which burneth with fire and brimstone, which is the second death." So the concept that this life is a challenge that needs to be overcome is consistent in the scriptures, and is an important foundational component of God's plan. And one of the previous videos was about God's plan, and included in that was a lot of discussion about this idea. So the question, why is there evil and suffering, is not a simple, straightforward, one component answer. Part of the reason that there's evil and suffering is that that's part of the challenge. That's something that not only we have to struggle through the evil and the problems that occur in our life, but we also have to come to grips mentally with that being a component of reality, the reality in which God's plan is taking place. The real problem that I perceive that most people have with suffering and with evil is that they see it as unfair to, let's pick a child, an infant, somebody who's an innocent, and their suffering is perceived as, and justifiably so, very unfair, that it's injustice. What that fails to take into consideration is, or where that perception breaks down, is that God doesn't limit his judgment and his concept of fairness to this life. This life is a test. It's a race. It's a trial. This isn't the reward. The fact that an infant dies does not mean that they won't have an opportunity for eternal life. The fact that a person struggles with physical handicap, mental handicap, whatever it might be, does not preclude them getting eternal life. And that's the goal. This life is very finite. Even if you live to be as old as the oldest living person currently, 125 years or whatever, even if you live that long, that's still pretty temporary. And what God has promised is eternal life, infinite life. And when you take 125 years and divide that by infinity, or divide infinity by 125 years, the ratio is unquestionably in favor of eternal life. So the sense of a complete injustice is inaccurate when what really we're shooting for is not a perfect mortal life, but to achieve immortal life. As we discussed previously, God's plan, God's intent is to end up with sons and daughters who have chosen to believe in him, to love him, and to obey him. And the thousands of years of human existence are a process God established in order to separate those who will love and obey him from those who won't. And the goal, as I perceive it in the scriptures, is that God intends to dwell with those who have overcome this test, that God intends to live among those people on a perfected planet in a marvelous city that he has built. My way of thinking about that is probably best illustrated by this example. So if you acquired an absolutely marvelous island and you determined that you did not want to live there by yourself, how selective would you be about who you invited to live with you on that island? Especially if the conditions were such that you could not have them leave, that they would be a permanent resident there. So how careful would you be about the type of person that you allowed to live on your island? Well, God intends to live with mankind, according to Revelation 21 and 22. He intends to come here, to leave heaven and come to the earth and live with his sons and daughters, those that have overcome this life, this test. What he has set up is a process whereby he can find the nicest people that have ever lived and invite them to live with him on his planet, in his city. And that level of exclusivity is fairly normal. I'm reminded of like the elite professional sports. Not just everybody gets to participate. Or elite military service. I was reading some statistics about, I think it was the Navy SEALs, that of the people who want to take the training to get into the Navy SEALs, only about 6% are accepted into the training. And once they get into the training, only about 25%, and it depends on that particular training session, but apparently on average only about 25% make it through the training. So you've got 25% of 6% would be somewhere around 2%. If I remember right, 1% of all of the Navy is in the SEALs. So that's a very, very exclusive group. And it's a very, very hard process going through the elimination to get to that elite service because they want the best. They don't want to send people out to do a mission and have that mission fail because the individual, an individual in that group, wasn't up to par. So God intends to dwell forever with those who overcome. So it really shouldn't be surprising that that's a very exclusive category. Jesus told us the ratio. He said that many are called, but few are chosen. So there's a couple answers to that question of how can a loving God allow there to be evil and suffering? And part of the answer is that's only for this life. And it's part of what we have to overcome. We as individuals have to overcome whatever evil and whatever suffering comes into our lives. And we have to have faith that God is going to make it fair, that this life isn't fair yet, that God is going to make it fair. And that takes faith. That takes an understanding of God's nature and God's intent in order for us to wrap our heads around the very real evil and suffering that we see in the world around us. Again, thank you for your time, and please leave comments, suggestions, questions, and I look forward to another visit on another day.